We gather from Swami Abhedananda's own account that while at Bhadrak Ashram, he had felt an irresistible desire to go to Tibet at that time, and he had then also expressed it to his companion, who then pointed to him about the impracticality of the idea for want of sufficient warm clothing with them. So he had to give up this idea of going to Tibet, but wrote later, "But though the idea did not materialize then, I cherished it ever in my mind, and I was determined to see for myself the forbidden country beyond the snow-capped Himalayas." It was nearly 3 decades later that Swami Abhedananda could fulfill that desire when he returned from America in 1922, and we shall refer to this memorable episode in his life at the appropriate place of our narration. Their next destination was Kedarnath, and for this purpose they had to retrace their journey along with other fellow pilgrims. The way to Kedarnath is also known as Mahaprastham Path, or the road of the great journey. In the mythological age, it was through this track that Panchapandavas, or the 5 sons of the king Pandu, made their final journey, accompanied by their consort, Draupadi. As the pilgrims heard this story, which was recounted to them by the Pandas, or the attendants, their mind went back to those golden days of the Mahabharata. Swami Abhedananda writes, "We went on barefooted by the side of the river Mandakini to our destination. As we were approaching towards Kedarnath, the track seemed almost impassable due to extreme coldness. We were feeling our knees frozen and almost benumbed as we walked on, and it was getting more and more terribly cold, and this compelled us to break our journey at some intervals. On the way to Kedarnath, there is a hot spring named Gurukunda, and there are rows of pines and also other kinds of trees on both sides of this road. But after Gurukunda, there are no traces of shrubs or trees, only the long stretch of bare and snow-clad mountains are visible. The last inn where pilgrims have their rest before going to Kedarnath is known as Rambarachati, where hot tea is served free to all pilgrims. One sees from that place innumerable fountains flowing down the snow-clad mountains. Gradually, we went uphill, and as we went higher and higher, we began to feel breathing difficulty. Thus, trudging our way over the snow, at last we arrived at Kedarnath. There we noticed that the Pandas had cleaned the entrance to the temple by removing the heaps of snow that gathered round the place with the help of an axe. The place surrounding the temple was still covered with snow, and it was with extreme difficulty that we, along with the fellow pilgrims, could manage our way to the inside of the temple. The very sight of the idol of Kedarnath Shiva filled our heart with a feeling of reverence. It is not a man-built deity. It is Svayambhu Shiva, that is, Shiva, the Lord who himself has assumed this stone figure, which was still covered with snow. We were delighted to touch the blessed deity. The floor inside the temple was full of water that came out of the melting snow. There was nothing but snow in and around the temple. We spent a night there with great difficulty, without having a wink of sleep. The temple of Kedarnath is built of stone, and the idol is of black stone. At the first sight, it would appear as if the peak of a mountain has cut separately and giving shape to the Shiva Linga, which is magnificent, both in its height and width. There are stone images of the Panchapandava, the Draupadi, and Kunti on the courtyard of the temple, the peak of which is visible from a distance of 1 mile. The approach to the temple is over a wooden bridge below which flows the river Mandakini. There is a beautiful bathing place near about the temple. And here Swami Abhedananda has referred to an interesting account as to the origin of the temple, as described in the Puranas, and the inquisitive readers may well read that in his Bengali autobiography. And this bears testimony to his profound knowledge of the mythologies of India. This also indicates that to the high priest of monism and the exponent of the Vedantic doctrine, even our mythologies were regarded as not insignificant, which is quite natural on the part of the disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, whose unique spiritual sadhana encompassed all scriptures and all orthodoxies. Their next phase of journey, which commenced from Bhatmari Chata, was towards Gangotri. The road from this place was bifurcated, one leading to Gangotri and the other to Jamunotri. Swami Abhedananda writes, "At first, we took the road to Gangotri. There were some trees on both sides of the road, the dry leaves on which seemed to be intoxicated as we tasted some of them. On reaching Gangotri, I was charmed with the natural scenery, which appeared to me as unique. It was terribly cold there. The wide range of mountains on all sides were fully covered with snow. Here we picked up our acquaintance with a sannyasin who belonged to the sect found by Guru Nanak, and accompanied by him sent to visit to the place Gomukhi. He was a Sikh. This is the origin of the river Ganges. The confluence of 7 currents born out of snow is known as Gomukhi, from where rises the Ganges. The place remains snow-covered throughout the year. Returning to Gangotri, we spent a night there, and to protect ourselves from the cold, we procured some blankets, and a small fire had to be lit. Our new acquaintance, an Udashi Sadhu, was very much attentive to us. The next morning, we left the place for our journey to Jamunotri, and again we had to retrace our steps right up to Bhatmari Chati. On arriving there, we came to learn that some sadhus, along with some householder pilgrims, were preparing for their journey to Jamunotri. We accompanied them and thus commenced our pilgrimage to Jamunotri. The road lay through deep jungle, and the climate was freezingly cold. A few days after, we reached the destination and found a large tank full of hot water at Jamunotri, which was generally used by the pilgrims for cooking their food. We procured some flour and rice, and the fellow pilgrims, which we tied up in a piece of cloth, and dipped the bundle in hot waters of the tank, which instantly cooked them. The rice thus boiled, however, melted and kind of into a mineral sulfur, and it was terribly cold at Jamunotri, perhaps the coldest region in the Himalayan pilgrimage. Both of us took shelter in a cave nearby where we lit a fire with dried leaves and branches of the trees and spent the whole night in deep meditation. There were hardly any village or human habitations nearby. We left Jamunotri the next morning and again returned to Bhatmari Chati, the starting point, after 2 or 3 days. From Bhatmari, the monks went to Uttarkashi, which was at a distance of some 80 or 85 miles, and it took them about 3 days to reach the destination. Thus ended their strenuous pilgrimage, and after spending one night at Uttarkashi, they began their return journey, arriving at Rishikesh after a few days en route through Dehradun. Here they met some of their old acquaintances, who were pleased to find them safely back to the place. It was already been told that prior to the journey to Kedarnath Badranath, Swami Abhedananda had built by the side of the Ganges a jhupri, with long grass, which grow in abundance in the region, and little branches of the trees, where he used to spend his days in spiritual practice. During the long period of his pilgrimage in the Himalayas and the Tirthas, perhaps no other place attracted him so much as Rishikesh, as it did also Swami Vivekananda during his wandering. The very sight of the place and its calm and quiet and holy surroundings must have appealed to his spiritual nature, and this was why he wanted again to halt at Rishikesh after the completion of his pilgrimage to Kedarnath and Badranath. As Swami Abhedananda wrote, "Rishikesh is the place hallowed by the Hindu legend and story. It is picturesque and a secluded spot, situated on the foot of the Himalayas in a valley surrounded by hills and almost encircled by the Ganges. The whole place is monastic. The very air is pure and holy. Thousands of yogis and sannyasins of diverse sects assemble there every year to spend the winter in reading the scriptures and practicing yoga and meditation. In those days, it was a jungle covered with graves, wild plum shrubs, bushes of wild flowers and evergreens, and dotted here and there with thatched cottages raised by the sadhus for their habitation and meditation. Abhedananda and his companions stayed there for some time, dwelling in a hut. But this time, along with the desire to perform severe sadhana, there arose in the mind of the Swami to study Vedanta philosophy, along with its commentary by Shankara. As Swami Abhedananda writes, in those days the name of Dhanaguri, the celebrated Mohant of Mandaleshvara of the Kailashmuth, spread throughout the northern region. He was not only a profound scholar in the 6 systems of Hindu philosophy, but was also a true sannyasin who preferred renunciation and knowledge to anything else. I began to study the Vedanta philosophy under this eminent scholar, who was highly pleased as my attainments. I remember that when the Swami, that is, Vivekananda, went to Rishikesh, incidentally, he asked this man about me, and he praised much, saying, Abhedananda, he is a man of phenomenal intelligence. He was so much pleased at this remark of the scholar that on future occasions, whenever Swami Vivekananda used to refer this incident to me, he appeared to feel proud. It was a matter of pleasure to him to hear someone praising his brother disciple. This incident is a clear indication of the true nature of the new communion of apostles founded at Anpur in the district of Hooghly and subsequently sanctified at the School of the Spirit at Varanakar. But his stay at Rishikesh at this time is notable not only for his deep study, but also for the austere sadhana which Kali Tapasi performed here while living in the thatched cottage. It was here that he experienced the highest spiritual realization for which he had been yearning since the dawn of his spiritual consciousness. The story has been very ably described by Swami Abhedananda himself in his autobiographical narration, which I quote. In those days, I used to spend my time at Rishikesh in deep study and austere sadhana. One day it flashed in my mind that the real knowledge or experience of Brahma, that is Brahman, the absolute consciousness, lies in the sense of non-differentiation between sandalwood paste and human excrement. So for a few days I engaged myself in practicing this sort of sadhana. And as there dawned in my mind the state of complete non-difference, I was drowned in eternal bliss. But I did not stop there. It occurred to my mind that physical ailment is the only touchstone by which it can be proved if my sense of non-differentiation is conclusive or not. If my mind is indifferent to the excruciating pain due to a dis-ease, remains calm and poised, and fully immersed in the absolute, only then shall I realize that I have reached the goal of self-knowledge. This is why one day as I sat for meditation, I prayed for some sort of physical ailment. Strange as it might seem, I was really laid down within 3 days with fever and bronchitis and bloody dysentery, all at the same time, and completely bedridden. Tulsi became very afraid and anxious. By the grace of the Master, it was just at that moment that some of my brother monks, that is, Swami Turiyananda and Swami Sharananda, arrived in Rishikesh after returning from their respective pilgrimage. They came to know from other sadhus that we were there staying, and soon they found us. We were overjoyed to see our brothers after such a long time. They are our true Guru Bhais. Though completely bedridden, I was not in the least overpowered by the combined attack of the 3 kinds of ailments. I maintained my calmness, though at intervals I was losing consciousness due to high fever. Thus, Rishikesh witnessed the birth of Swami Abhedananda as Kali Tapasi passed the acid test of self-knowledge. In that golden hour, there dawned in his mind a feeling as it never had dawned before, that the phenomenal world was transitory and unreal, and that he was a mute spectator, like the unchangeable Atman of Vedanta, which always remains as the witness of phenomena. Thus, the young spiritual aspirant who went to Dakshinaswar as a teenage boy, and the ardent ascetic at Branagar Monastery, and the steadfast pilgrim who walked barefooted right up to the source of the Ganges, all these different aspects of the spiritual personality were now fully sublimated to the highest state of transcendental realization. And out of that there came out a luminous spirit, which now assumed the name Swami Abhedananda, the bliss of non-duality. Unless one takes into account this metamorphosis stage by stage in the spiritual nature of our subject, it would not be possible for anybody to know the life and mind of the person true to his name, set a new example in spiritual sadhana and in his search for spiritual truth. This brings to our mind the following lines of Sri Aurobindo, one of the greatest spiritual explorers and seekers of truth during the post-Ramakrishna era, who said, "Spiritual truth is a truth of the spirit, not a truth of the intellect, not a mathematical theorem or a logical formula. It is a truth of the infinite, one in an infinite diversity, and it can assume an infinite variety or aspects and formations in the spiritual evolution. It is inevitable that these should be many-sided passages and reaching to the one truth, a many-sided seizing of it. This many-sidedness is the sign of the approach of the soul to a living reality, not to an abstraction or a constructed figure of things that can be petrified into a dead or strong formula. The hard logical and intellectual notion of truth as a single idea which all must accept, one idea or the system of ideas delineating all ideas or systems, or a single limited fact, or single formula of facts, which all must recognize, is an illegitimate transference from the limited truth of the physical field to the much more complex field of life, of mind and spirit. Rishikesh witnessed this inevitable evolution of a soul in a pilgrim who was one of the inheritors of the great spiritual treasure left by Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa, the God incarnate. His pilgrimage was therefore not in vain, and this leads us to the conclusion that as a spiritual being, Swami Abhedananda was not an individual, but a phenomenal being who witnesses everything and comes only rarely every century.